My name is Chip Redmond. I work at Kansas State University. I'm the Kansas Mesonet manager. So you guys are probably like, what's a Mesonet? Well, I just handed out some paperwork because I got to do PR for my job, my full-time job as well. So feel free to hit the website in the back there, and you can look at some of this data that I'm going to talk about today. And you can also look at real-time weather data. I'm also an incident meteorologist with the Rocky Mountain Incident Management Team, and I go out through the Forest Service. So I'm really keen on fire weather and especially incident fire weather. So I'm going to present a little bit of an outlook today. I mean, it's the weather, right? You could be wrong 90% of the time and still keep your job. With that, I'll give you just a brief overview of some of the things we're looking at going into this fire season, and then we'll look at climatologically what we can expect coming into the spring. So there's three things that you got to look into when you're looking at a fire in general. We call it the fire triangle: weather, topography, and fuels. Out of these three things, how many can we change? Well, the two are going to change, right? Yeah, fuels and weather are the only variables in there that are going to change with time. So going into a fire season, I mean, you can overview your topography, and it's good to know it. But you need to look at the fuels and the weather. So we'll focus first on the fuels, and that's going to be kind of the main thing we're looking at this season. The weather and climate is a little harder to predict this time of year, and due to some of the other bigger picture things, it's a little harder to predict as well. So where do we sit at right now? This is outdated because I had to send this in by Tuesday. In central Kansas, they added, as of today, they added D2 drought into Barber, Harper, and Comanche County, and the whole state, except for 1% in the far northeast, is now in abnormally dry. So we're progressively getting drier, and I think we all are aware of that. This doesn't seem like it's too bad, right? But let's put it in perspective of the last 2 years. When we had fire seasons the last 2 years, in 2016, the Anderson Creek Fire in Barber County, this is going into the week of, Barber County wasn't even in any drought or considered abnormally dry. Last year, or I guess this year, and for Starbuck, just focusing on that area, they had D1 drought. So we weren't in extreme or severe drought either of those 2 years. So how does that impact? We had our biggest fires. Wouldn't you think they'd be correlated with drought? Well, just looking at where we're sitting at right now, we're drying out, and this is the short-term one. Just focus on Kansas. Yellow is drier. Green is more moist. I like this one because it looks at surplus. So the long-term, on the left side, Kansas still has some green. We still have surplus, typically in the soil level and below, in your lakes, some of your rivers. But short-term, we're drying out, and we're continuing to dry out. So those are the trends we want to look at going into the fire season, regardless of what the drought condition is. Let's take a step back. Let's go back to May. Was it wet? Yeah. We had a lot of rain April into May. So what does a lot of rain in April and May do to the grasses in Kansas? All right, we are going to get a lot more grass. So we get a lot more grass. That grass doesn't just magically disappear in the summertime or in the fall. It sticks around, it dries and cures out in the fall. So the biggest indicator that we have to go into this fire season is how much precipitation we had the previous growing season. So this is kind of a complicated graph, but the blue line is soil moisture at 20 centimeters, so about 8 inches at one of our weather stations. These red columns here are precipitation. So if we look at, this is for 2017, and then the last end of 2016. So in October of last year, we had decreasing soil moisture, but we kept having intermittent precipitation events. So what that did is it kept that subsurface soil moisture there. And then we had this big rain event here in January. We had 1.5 inches. This is Spearville, so we're in Ford County. It pretty much impacted all of south central Kansas. So what that did is build up, you see that big spike in soil moisture, that blue line, that built up our soil moisture. So we actually had, going into fire season, we had actually pretty good soil moisture. So that's that big rain event. We were actually had quite a bit of drought that was expanding across Kansas. See, it sounds kind of familiar, right? Dry season, we're drying out. It's not abnormal to be dry this time of year. This is the driest time of year. We average, depending on where you're at, um, sometimes less than an inch of rain a month in some locations. So as you go into the Starbuck fire, we had that abundant soil moisture, but we still had growing drought. And why is that? Because of our surface fuels, and our surface moisture was decreasing. We had above normal temperatures. We had increased winds for about a month to 2 months there after that January event. And that impacts, that's the primary driver for fires in Kansas, is our short-term weather patterns to the state for the big fires. We're just focusing on the big fires. And by the way, this was the week after the fire, so I showed you earlier the week before. That was our knowledge, right? We go into the fire with what information we have going into it. So obviously, after a week of hot, dry, windy, we had the fires, we increased our drought. So thank goodness April and May came. I mean, we had significant rain, especially the Spearville area. Anyone here from Ford County, Dodge City? Nope. Had significant rain in this area. In fact, record-breaking rain. So that built up that soil moisture as well, and then we maintained it with more additional rain. But then we kept that soil moisture going into June and July. However, even though we still had some moisture, we saw our soil moisture finally start to drift off in June and into July. It was pretty dry in June and July, right? But we still had that subsurface soil moisture, which still allowed that fuel growth. So getting into May, we lost all our drought. We were drought free. So one of the big indicators is the percent of normal. So these are the climate divisions in Kansas and the percent of normal precipitation in April and May. 150 to 160% of normal rainfall for 2 months. So we really, really built up that fuel load. So we're ready. We're ready to rock. There's only one other factor, well, two, I guess, that can really impact our fuels from here on out. And that's snowfall or ice. Snow compacts the grasses down. So it takes that vertical fuel load and mats it down. It doesn't make it available. And it'll decrease your snow and ice will mat those fuels down. Right now, we haven't had any snow. And to be honest, looking at the long-term forecast, don't get too excited for snow, especially a significant snow. Like we can have a couple inches, and it's not really going to pack that grasses down. Ice is another one. 2 years ago we had that ice storm in central Kansas. We still had some fires, but anything that can help us with ice compaction, we'll take it at this point for looking at it just from the fire aspect. So we're not looking at any more fuel growth this time of year, and we're looking at a lot of fuel growth and a lot of standing growth. So until something changes, that's going to be our biggest component going into this year. And look at the last 2 years, we had big fires. So just kind of take that into this year as well, because we had big fuel loads the last 2 years as well. So then we go back into the short term. We need to look at the weather and some of the climatology going into this. It's really all driven by wind, right? I mean, we don't have a big fire in Kansas without some sort of significant wind, and especially the wind shifts. So we get a big fire that goes one direction. It's pretty easy to say, well, go to that spot and put it out. But when you get that big wind shift, it takes that whole flank of that fire, makes a huge head fire, and you're defenseless against it. So it really even comes down to a day-by-day thing. You can have something like this happen. So just going back to what we were talking about before, where we're at right now. Weather-wise, we're dry. This is using Kansas Mesonet data. And some of these places, and this is as of a couple days ago, so these numbers have gone up by the number of days, with 3 days. We're at 70, upper 60s. The amount of days since our last wetting rain. That's 2 months since the wetting rain. So we're looking at, thankfully, it's the driest time of the year, so we're not building a huge deficit in precipitation, but we've completely taken away any moisture in the grass, taken away any moisture in the near surface, and we're starting to deplete that subsurface. And we can see that if we go back to that soil moisture. So remember last year how this angle, we kept that soil moisture up because we kept getting intermittent precipitation? Well, here we had a little blip there in early or mid-November in this location, but look at that, we're drying out really flipping fast. So keep that in mind. The longer we go without precipitation, we're just preparing those bigger fuels, and we're gradually building a bigger deficit going into the fire season. That's just me getting the feedback? Does anyone else hear that feedback? No? Okay, cool. I'm just dreaming. Okay, so let's take our scope out a little bit and look at the world. This is the United States of America right here. We're in Kansas. We're right in the middle of it. This is a map of the sea surface temperature. So when we look at, you guys ever heard of El Nino, La Nina? Okay. So we're looking at, in this region right here, cooler temperatures. So without getting real technical and down into the nitty-gritty, that slight green in there is cooler temperatures. So right now we're in a weak La Nina, and we're expected to continue in that weak La Nina. Another area to keep in mind of, too, is off this west coast of the U.S. and what our temperatures are. See how it's fairly latitudinal there? It's east-west. There's not a significant change in temperatures off the west coast either. So just keep that in the back of your head, and we'll talk about that in a minute. El Nino, La Nina. Right now, anything below zero is considered a La Nina. So we're below zero right now. We're at about negative 0.5, which is a very weak La Nina. We're expected to maybe increase the impact of La Nina, and then eventually, seasonally, we trend out of La Nina, El Nino as we get towards summer. Or we trend towards El Nino or neutral conditions. So we're in a weak La Nina, which is basically kind of weak forcing. We're not seeing any dominant weather patterns. We're more dependent upon other global things. So what happens with La Nina? This is a typical flow. You get that cool air down here, and you typically get the jet stream pushing up north and then coming down with a northwest flow across Kansas. Well, what have we had? I'll skip ahead. What have we had the last, 3 weeks? We've had persistent northwest flow. We have had gusty winds, and usually the jet stream's a good indicator of, especially the polar jet stream. South of it, you're warmer. North of it, you're colder. Well, it takes that cold air over the Great Lakes and keeps that warmer air, in California, and the West Coast. So we're kind of right in the middle. But unfortunately for us, that means a really dry period. And you can see that as climatologically, when we have La Nina, we're right on the edge of that cool to cold, and then we're in dry and warm. So we're kind of seeing, even though it's a weak La Nina, we're seeing the impacts of a predominant La Nina. With that not changing and forecasted to change in the next few months, that's kind of the trend you need to take into looking forward to January and February and March, our fire season, essentially. Any questions on that? Did I lose anybody? Does anybody need a coffee break or stand up, do some jumping jacks to wake up? And this is just an additional map to reemphasize that we're right on that barrier of this is precipitation, so below normal precipitation. And if you look at our precipitation, this is just accumulated precip for basically the month of December. And you can see we're bone dry, and so is the whole West. The mountains, looking west, Rocky Mountains are really hurt for any moisture. All the ski resorts are really struggling. Wyoming had a really gangbusters November. They're drying out too. Obviously, South Dakota just had a big fire too. So we're not the only ones impacted by this. So going back to these sea surface temperatures, the other predominant sea or cycle, I guess I'll call it, is called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. Basically, when you get this warm water up along the west coast here, and it's independent of whatever happens out here in La Nina. You get warm water up the west coast, you're enhancing that jet stream to push northward. So lately we've been in a positive Pacific Decadal Oscillation. So
we have we've seen that ridge amplified in that northwest flow over Kansas and dry and cool. When it switches to the opposite on the right there, where it starts to become cooler along the west, we we approach that we're going to get more storm systems in the west. They're going to bring more moisture up from the Gulf, and we're going to be hunky dory in Kansas, nice and wet. Um, Unfortunately, there's a blip in this. If you look at the forecast out, this is Saturday, December 16th. We do have, this is just throwing something out there, but we do have a storm system expected to come that's going to kind of knock down that ridge and possibly with a chance of moisture late in the month. But, you know, moisture this time of year is not going to last long because it's the dry season. If we get one storm system that drops a good 2 inches of rain across the whole state of Kansas, and 2 weeks later, we're going to be completely dried out and ready to rock because our grasses are cured out. They're not live fuels. So we're looking at some short-term indications of moisture, but long-term throughout the season, we're looking at continued dry because we keep getting that weak La Nina. And the PDO is expected to say, and this is the way it is. There's not a ton of warm water or not a ton of cold water up the coast. Typically, this is where we just had a negative. We're going to go swing towards positive, but right now it's not a driving indicator either. So it's really hard to forecast long term right now, especially because everyone's focused on Christmas and everybody wants a white Christmas. No one cares about January or February or March. Santa Claus can still find your house. There's snow on the ground. So just to kind of summarize my thoughts, you know, we had that any bout of precipitation isn't going to be a long-term indicator for us. We can have no drought in the whole state of Kansas, but one windy day is really going to impact that. Um, and with the jet stream the way it is, we're looking at average, maybe slightly cooler temperatures. We're going to stay windy, but it's Kansas, right? There's Dorothy calls it a home for a reason. Um, and we're looking at this dry period predominantly continuing through January and February. The one thing that works against our favor is our fire season for a reason. It's not just to find fuels. In early spring, climatologically, we start to get dry storm systems as we get closer and closer to the wet storm systems. So basically, the jet stream starts dipping down, get more aggressive. We're actually coming up and getting more aggressive, and we start to see more storm systems in March, especially, and in April. Well, when they start coming across Kansas, they're not able to tap into that moisture right away. So what you have is basically strong, dry storm systems. So climatologically, going into March, we're going to expect an uptick in fire weather, and critical fire weather, just because that's just what happens in Kansas. And when you combine the fuels with that, that's the main indicator right there of why we're going to have above average fire season. So the predictive services, just to go through some other people's thoughts, to show you I'm not full of boohickey. We're looking at the Rocky Mountain region input into this. They're expecting above average large fire potential, and there's a whole argument about that. But a large fire is any fire that would basically last longer than one operational period. So you're looking at a longer than a one-day event. So they expect most of Central Plains to continue that. And if you look at that La Nina impacts, warm and dry, that same area. So everyone's kind of on the same page as that. Looking at the Climate Prediction Center, they're thinking the same. Just below normal precipitation and equal chances of normal precipitation for Kansas. This is for this month, and you can basically copy and paste it for January. And then when you compare January, February, and March, the 3 months averaged out, you see the same thing. We're right on the edge. That jet stream is just right on the cusp of not quite putting us warmer and drier, and not quite putting us colder and wetter yet. But unfortunately for Kansas, that's going to average drier. So this is what I'm talking about, is when I say this dynamic storm systems, is you basically get a low pressure system that'll usually develop in western Kansas. That's what the little L's are. And then you basically have a dry line that sets up out ahead of it that And then to the east of your dry line, you get the strong southerly winds, and then the dry line moves through. That shifts your winds to the southwest, and then the cold front comes through. That shifts your winds to the west, northwest, all within 24, 36 hours. So the big fires we've seen in Kansas the last 2 years have all been dominated by this type of storm system. And climatologically, going into February and March, we see more of these. It's just nature. So some places you can access some information is the Kansas Forest Service webpage. If you go to their kansasforest.org, I have all the links at the end. You can go to their, hopefully I'm not stealing any of your thunder, guys, but I was asked to mention it. So you go down here to fire management, click that first tab, and you can learn some about fire weather. I do a forecast update twice a week. If you just want to look at a quick glance statewide, that's you can look at there. Then there's also some more information about the current fire situation. If you go to that second one down is our grassland fire danger index that we've been doing for 2 years now. Just a quick glimpse statewide what conditions could possibly be like. It uses the Weather Service forecast. Red is bad, green is good. And that goes out for 3 days, and I'm going to try to expand that out to maybe a week this year. And then, the Mesonet. So if you, one of the really good tools that's available to you if you ever are on a fire and you need real-time weather data is the Kansas Mesonet. We have 58 stations spread out throughout the state, and we're going to grow. We'll have 60 hopefully by the end of the year at the least. And we're trying to fill in the holes mostly. But you can get real-time 5-minute data here on this website. You can click the little tabs up here if you want to see what the winds are, and it will show you where a front's coming across the state, or it'll show you the 24-hour precip. You can download historical data. There's all kinds of cool things you can do.